That wasn't working too well in the United States, especially in America. But even so, even with the what I should say, the conservative natural that was the theory of order. That's divine sovereignty, and that's it. Among the contractual theorists, natural law theorists, Hugo Grotius and other Grotians were conservatives. They believed that people were originally sovereign. They delegated their powers to the king way back at some misty wood, but then it's perpetual. Then the king has to keep it forever, and they can't get it back. This seems to me, and seems to other more radical natural rights people, as being inconsistent. And so Father Juan de Mariana, one of my favorite people in history of political thought, Spanish Jesuit scholastic, John Locke and his followers, they said, no, look, if we delegated our powers to the king and the king turns out to be a bad guy and violates his trust, we can take it back. Why can't we take these powers back? So the theory, and this was essentially the theory of the American revolutionaries, that we delegated certain powers to the king, he violated it, we're taking it back. It was a contractual theory of government. Government by the just consent of the governed and not by some divine sovereignty. Now, whether or not you agree with that, it seems to me the American Revolution was founded on that principle, that this is a contractual compact theory of government. And interestingly enough, by the way, as is well known, it was a big psychological thing for the American revolutionaries to break with the king. The Parliament they didn't give a damn about. Parliament they hated, and that was it. So remember the Declaration of Independence, there's almost no mention of Parliament. It's all the king. The king has done this, the king is evil, blah, blah, blah. Because they had to break this cord with the king. It was a terrible thing for them. They had all taken oaths of allegiance to the king. The king was a real person. Unlike the so-called Union, which I'll come to in a minute, the king was real. Okay, so they had to break with the king. It was a powerful problem with them, and Tom Paine's common sense essentially did that. In the terms of the New Left, Paine's common sense desanctified and delegitimatized the king. He said, the king of Great Britain, Tom Paine wrote, is only the descendant of, quote, nothing better than the principal ruffian of some restless gang, whose savage manner of preeminence and subtlety obtained him the title of chief among plunderers, unquote. And now he says the kings are the royal brood of Great Britain are but crowned ruffians. Okay, this was a powerful thing for Americans, for American psychology. And they enabled them to break, and they only broke with the king about a year after the war started. The American Revolution started in spring of 1775, and only by July 76 they were able to make the break. Okay, so government, the American Republic is founded on contractual and withdrawing consent from the king, from the government. Now what happens is that the 13 colonies, each of the 13 colonies formed 13 separate contractual republics. Each of them, they're based on libertarian doctrine, classical republican models. In each case, they set up independent sovereign states with powers of government strictly limited. I think the first time in human history had a written constitution whose purpose was to strictly limit the powers of the government. The powers are reserved to the people, the checks and balances and everything else to try to limit. They're very suspicious of all government power, even local government power. They want to keep it limited, keep their eye on it at all times, and zap it whenever it gets strong. And each of the 13 republics did that. So then, of course, the 13 separate republics, having done this, have been making this fantastic break. Britain formed representatives to the Continental Congress, and they formed a confederation to help them fight the war with severely limited central powers. Then they decided, after about a decade later, to scrap the Articles of Confederation, adopt a new constitution. Now, the very point, which should be emphasized more, the fact that the Articles of Confederation could be scrapped just like that, as a piece of paper, meant that it was not supposed to be perpetual. Okay, the 13 states said, okay, we think the Articles are now insufficient, whatever, and we're going to form the Constitution. It'd be very peculiar to hold the American revolutionaries had repudiated their Pledge of Allegiance to a real king and then a couple of years later scrap the Articles of Confederation in order to sign up to adopt a constitution which they considered to be totally perpetual, like a one-way Venus flytrap. Once you adopt it, you're finished forever. You can't get out. Can you imagine the Constitution was hardly ratified as it was? I mean, the majority of the public is against the Constitution anyway. Can you imagine them doing it if they knew this was a one-way ticket to disaster, to suicide? Of course not. And so the idea that the Union was somehow perpetual and eternal is ridiculous. It's illogical and ridiculous. It violates the entire process by which the American republics were founded. Okay, so, and yet, of course, this is the illogic. This monstrous illogic is the argument of the North of why the South could not secede from the Union. That somehow, once the act of adopting the Union was adopted or was created, it was a one-way ticket. That's it. As I say, kamikaze for sovereignty. In 1861, the Southern states, believing correctly that their cherished institutions were under grave threat, I think they were, and under assault from the federal government, they decided to exercise their natural, contractual, and constitutional right to withdraw. They secede from that union. And they came together in another confederation, the Confederated States of America. So if the American Revolutionary War is just, if we're prepared to say that, then we have to be prepared to say the Southern cause, the war for Southern independence, was also just, and equally so, and that the British, if the British were unjust, and I think they were, then the Northern cause was also equally unjust. Now, of course, in neither case, in neither the American Revolution nor the Southern secession was the decision made for light or transient causes. In both cases, the courageous seceders pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And as I say, if the Southern cause was wrong, then both North and South should have gone to the King of England with hat in hand and begged forgiveness and rejoined the empire. Okay, so now what about the grievances? I won't spend too much time on the grievances, but basically the American grievance was on taxes and different forms of taxes. The trial by jury question was really a question of because American juries would not convict so-called smugglers for disobeying British tariffs. The general search warrants were searching for customs booty. It was all connected with taxes, and the Southern cause was also mostly connected with taxes, with high tariffs, as Lou Rockwell pointed out today, bleeding the South in order to create inefficient Northern manufacturers and shippers. So, and again, I don't want to go through this whole thing about taxes, but John C. Calhoun was a brilliant tax analyst. Essentially what he said was that the very existence of government, the very existence of taxation creates conflicting classes. This is not a Marxist theory of class struggle, it's a libertarian theory of class struggle. Namely, once you've got a government, some people are living off taxes and other people are paying it. Bureaucrats don't pay taxes. Guy who works for the government doesn't pay taxes. If he's getting a salary of $50,000 a year and pays $10,000 in taxes, he's getting a salary of $40,000. $10,000 is simply fiction. It's accounting fiction that justifies his existence to the rest of the poor public. Okay? One of the interesting things, coming from New York as I do, the United Nations, the beloved United Nations, the bureaucrats there pay no taxes at all. And people are indignant. Yeah, they pay no taxes. It's great, but of course they're more candid about it than the United States government. They just don't pay taxes. The United States government, the accounting fiction is preserved. And so in zeroing in on the tariff as a key question, Calhoun pointed out, quote, the North has adopted a system of revenue and disbursements in which an undue proportion of the burden of taxation has been imposed on the South and an undue proportion appropriated to the North and for monopolization of Northern industry. Of course, we know that somebody mentioned again today, this week, the first South Carolina threat of nullification came about because of the Tariff of Abominations of 1828, the evil high tariff of 1828. Okay, what about the opposition of these two just wars? It seems to be plainly, evidently just. Both the opponents were unjust. The British, what was the British motivation? Okay, the British wanted to hold on to their empire. It's fairly clear why they wanted to hold on to the empire. They wanted to bleed the Americans. In a sense, it's coherent, at least. What were the motivations of the North? That's to me more interesting. Why, in the famous words of the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison, did not the North, quote, let their erring sisters go in peace? At least Garrison's original position before he got swept up in the war fever. Why did they let them go? Why did they let the South secede? What was the point? The driving force, again, I don't want to get too detailed, but the driving force of the North, the driving force for the war, is a group of people called the Yankees. Now, in contrast to what most people think, Yankees not just people who lived in the North. The Yankees were a specific ethno-cultural group who started in New England, then spread. They're big, very mobile, the Yankees. They migrated to upstate New York to northern Indiana, northern Illinois, eastern Ohio, and places around the Great Lakes. And they were the major proponents of this stuff, abolitionism and general coercion. The Yankees had been swept up by a new form of Protestantism around 1830. A new form is we can call fanatical and emotional neo-Puritanism, driven by a fervent postmillennialism, which held that as a precondition for the second advent of Jesus Christ, Man must set up a 1,000-year